On October 12, 1972, 45 people boarded a chartered military flight in Uruguay. Most of them were members of a young rugby team, heading out with their friends and family for what was supposed to be a 3-hour trip to Santiago, Chile. To get to Santiago, the plane had to cross the massive Andes mountain range. Heavy cloud cover limited visibility, and relying on flawed navigational calculations, the co-pilot misjudged their position. Believing they had already cleared the mountains, he began to descend while still directly over the high-altitude, jagged peaks. The ground collision alarm sounded too late. The aircraft clipped a rocky ridge, tearing off the tail section and sucking several passengers out into the freezing air. The remaining fuselage hit the ground and slid down a steep glacier at 350 kilometers per hour before slamming into a massive snowbank. When the metal finally stopped moving, 33 people were still alive. They had survived the immediate impact, but they were now stranded without winter gear in one of the most isolated and unforgiving environments on the planet. They were 3,500 meters up in the Andes. At night, temperatures dropped well below zero, and the survivors were wearing only light spring clothing. They huddled inside the shattered fuselage, using broken seats and luggage to block the freezing wind. 2 first-year medical students took charge, tending to deep wounds and shattered bones with whatever scrap materials they could find. To delay starvation, they gathered the small amount of food found in the luggage and implemented extreme rationing. A single chocolate-covered peanut was meant to sustain a person for 3 days. Hearing the distant hum of search planes, the group tried everything to be seen. They dragged suitcases into the snow to form a cross and gathered every tube of lipstick on board to write a massive SOS on the roof of the plane, hoping the red would stand out. But against the endless white of the glacier, the fuselage was practically invisible. For the first 10 days, the group operated on a singular strategy: waiting. Believing rescue was coming kept them calm, but it also kept them dangerously passive, while the cold and starvation slowly drained their bodies. On day 11, they managed to get a small transistor radio working. Gathering around the static, they tuned into a news broadcast from Chile. The announcer stated that the search operations for the missing Uruguayan flight had been officially called off. The outside world had given up. In a matter of seconds, the comfort of an impending rescue completely evaporated. Starving and isolated, they faced a brutal reality. There was no vegetation and no wildlife on the glacier. To keep their bodies from shutting down, the survivors made the agonizing decision to consume the frozen bodies of their dead friends and family. For a group of devoutly religious young people, this was a heavy psychological burden. To manage the trauma, they sat together in the cold and made a solemn pact. They gave each other explicit permission. If any of them died on the mountain, the others could use their body as food to stay alive. The broadcast changed the math of their survival. For 10 days, they had waited for a solution from the sky. Now, they understood that every hour spent sitting still was an hour closer to death. If they were going to get off the mountain, they had to be the ones to do it. Just as they reached this decision, the mountain struck again. On day 16, a massive avalanche roared down the peak and buried the fuselage entirely. 8 more people suffocated in the pitch black. The remaining survivors were trapped inside a cramped, freezing snow cave for 3 days. When they finally managed to poke a metal pole through the roof and dig their way out, their perspective shifted. The mountain would continually try to kill them, and staying at the crash site was now a guarantee of death. Their only chance was to climb out. They selected their strongest remaining members for a hiking expedition and began improvising the gear they would need. They pulled cotton insulation from the airplane seats and stitched it together with copper wire to build a massive sleeping bag. They carefully packed human meat to serve as high-altitude rations. The group stopped acting like castaways and began treating the mountain as a problem to be solved. They stopped scanning the sky for helicopters and started calculating the specific equipment they would need to walk 60 kilometers through a frozen wasteland. On day 60, 3 men left the crash site. Wearing layers of jeans, multiple sweaters, and improvised snowshoes made of seat cushions, they began a grueling climb up a near-vertical glacier. The air was dangerously thin, and they had absolutely no climbing equipment. It took 3 days to reach the summit. They expected to look out and see the green valleys of Chile. Instead, they saw an endless expanse of brutal, snow-capped peaks stretching to the horizon. Realizing their rations wouldn't support all 3 men for that distance, they made a choice. One man slid back down to the fuselage to conserve food, while Fernando Parado and Roberto Canessa pushed forward. Together, they hiked 61 kilometers over 10 straight, exhausting days. By every medical standard, they should have succumbed to malnutrition and exposure. This trek was a complete defiance of human physical limits, driven entirely by the psychological imperative to save the friends they had left behind. Eventually, the snow began to thin. They descended into a rushing river valley and saw cows grazing near the water. On the opposite bank of the roaring river, they finally spotted a Chilean farmer on horseback. The water was far too loud for shouting. The next morning, the farmer threw a pen and paper across the river. Parado wrote a message, tied it to a rock, and tossed it back. The note read, "I come from a plane that fell in the mountains." On day 72, military helicopters finally reached the crash site. The remaining 14 survivors were pulled from the mountain, emaciated and weighing roughly half of what they did when they boarded the flight. The miracle of the Andes was a slow, grueling triumph of human agency. When every external system failed them, 16 people found a way to survive through radical teamwork and a refusal to stop moving.